right, guys. The new part for today, guys, if you look at your pink sheet, we filled in the first column of factoring. We filled in how to do the second column, square root method, which is what we just again practiced this morning. We're going to start looking at completing the square today. Okay, if nothing else, today's goal is for you to kind of recognize how the process works, to write it down, and we'll practice some basic ones today. Tomorrow we'll focus on the ones that are a little harder, and you get some uglier fractions and things tomorrow. Okay. All right, so some problems can't be solved by factoring, right? Not everything factors. To take the square root method, what has to be missing? The bx has to be missing. So what if it has a bx and you can't factor it? Then what? Then you go to completing the square, right? All right, so completing the square, before I kind of show you the process, I'm going to take you through a problem where the process is being done so you can kind of see what's going on, and then we'll kind of break it down. So if I start out with this problem, x squared plus 10x minus 1. If you look at this, you cannot factor this, right? Because your options for A would be x and x. Your options for C would be 1 and 1. Would you ever get a 10 out of that? No, so this doesn't factor. It has a bx, so I can't use a square root method. All right, so take a look kind of step by step how this works. So what would be the first step that was done to this problem? They moved their c. Thank you for using a general term there. So they moved their c. They added the 1 to the other side. And they added 25 to both sides. Where did the former students are crazy. Where do you think the 25 came from? $25 is what type of number? It's a perfect square. So how do you think they went from here? What number squared is 25? 5. So where did they get a 5, you think, from here? The 10. How do you get a 5 from 10? They divided it by 2 and then they squared it? Okay. So why do you add it to both sides? Yeah, whatever you do to one side, you've got to do to the other side. Okay. Whoa. This is a big change, right? What the heck happened there? Well, we know this side, right? 1 plus 25 is where the 26 came from. We can do that side. Say that again? They factored it. Take a look at this. If I asked you to factor, you'd set up your parentheses. Last one's positive, so your signs are both plus. Options for A. 5 and 5. And if they're both the same, you can write it as one of them squared, because the squared means you have 2 of them, right? Okay. So they factored it. What did they do from here to here? The same thing you just practiced, right? Once your squared part's by itself, you take the square to both sides. What's the next step going to tell me? They're going to move the 5 to the other side. Okay? So really from here down, this is what we just did. This is not new. This is what we just practiced. Do you know how to factor? Mm-hmm. Can you move a c value to the other side? I can do that. So really the trickier part would be to go from here to knowing what number is added. But how did they do it? What did you just tell me? Mm-hmm. They divided this number by 2, and then they squared it. Okay. And then they factored it, and then we did what we just did. That's what we're going to talk about. That's the completing the square. So if you look at step by step here how this works, grab your pink sheet for me, please. We're going to want to jot this stuff down. Okay, so step 1 is you want to rewrite the equation in the form ax squared plus bx equals c. So you may want to, on your sheet, put that in more general terms here for you guys, because that's very wordy, right? We don't want all that wordy stuff. So right away, you might want to write ax squared plus bx equals c. That'll look very different, right, than the first column where you had ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So in other words, you want x's on one side, c on the other. If you want it more general terms. You want the x stuff on one side, you move your c to the other side. So that's your first step. Okay, from there, the step that we really didn't quite see in that example I showed you is you will divide everything by A. So whatever that a value is, and that's the part we're going to focus on more tomorrow, whatever that a value is, you divide everything, whether it makes an ugly fraction or divides nicely. Everything gets divided. After there's that part that you guys were like, you divide it by 2 and then you squared it. So you take your b value, you divide it by 2. The b value in that problem was 10. You divide it by 2, and then you square it. And then you take this and you add to both sides. Because again, just like Peyton said, if I do it to one side, I have to do it to the other side. I got to be fair. All right, from there, you will factor, and it will factor perfectly as a parenthesis of something squared. Completing the square, the way this is called, it's because you are making it so that it is guaranteed to factor so that you can write it as something squared every single time. That's why it's called completing the square. That's what you want it to happen. Right? Then you'll take the square root of both sides and solve for x. This one seems a whole lot of steps going on here, but it's not bad once you kind of get yourself rolling it and understand the process. Okay, so we start with x's on one side, move the c to the other. Divide everything by a, and that'll be our main focus for tomorrow. b over 2 squared, you'll add that to both sides of the equation. You'll factor it. It will guarantee to factor as to something squared. That's the whole point of this process. So you can then take the square root and you can solve. All right, so again, we're going to kind of baby step into this. So I'm not fully solving a problem right now. I just want to practice that whole b over 2 squared part, just so we can kind of see how this works. Because that's really the new part. That's the part that's a little different than what we've done before. So if I had x squared plus 4x plus something, what number would have to go there so that I can factor it as something squared? So what was the process? What number am I using? My b, right, which is 4. We divide it by 2, which is 2. And 2 squared is 4. So that would be what you would be adding to both sides if you were doing the full-blown process. Okay? Again, we're just practicing what number needs to go there, and then how does it factor. All right, so if I asked you to factor x squared plus 4x plus 4, how would that factor? Let's kind of take a minute over here and see how it works so you can see it the long version. Both of your signs would be plus. Options for a. Good. X plus 2, x plus 2. So it would be x plus 2 squared. Okay, let's do another one, and then I'll kind of see if we can recognize what's happening here to make this a little easier on ourselves. Okay, the next one. What's your b value? Michaela? Yes. Your last term, you always, if you notice back, if I can move my board here, you're always adding your value. No, I'm glad that you said that. Guys, the question was, what if my sign's 1's plus, 1's minus? How am I going to write it? That will never happen because we are always adding that value to both sides. So your sign here is always a plus because I'm always adding, which means your signs are always the same. Okay. All right, now number 2, my b value is 10. Some of you will be like, wait a minute, it's negative 10, which I agree. But if you square any number, what happens to it? It's positive. So the fact that this is negative, I don't really care, because it's always going to be a positive. I'm always going to add something to the other side. So 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 5 squared, 25. So if I would try to factor this, again, I'll let you see the long version here. What would your signs be? Good. They'd both be minus, right, because of this one. Options for A would be x and x. And your option for C is going to be 5 and 5. So it's x minus 5 squared. Which 2? This? That's part of the formula. B divided by 2 squared. Yep, that's just always there. Now, let's take a look at a couple things, because this process should be fast, okay? You should not have to actually write this down and then rewrite it like this. I want you guys to kind of notice a couple things. Always. Do you guys see this? See my little side notes? I didn't do this just because it's your first time doing this. I always do them. Still to this day, if you watch my answer keys, these little notes are always off to the side of my problem. Always. Because the number before I squared it is always the number that's in my factor. The number before I squared it is the number over here, every time. And that's very helpful when you get some ugly fractions like we will tomorrow. Okay, Allie, put it away. Notice your sign. My sign here was a plus. Whatever that sign is the sign when you factor. So this should be a pretty quick, fast process. So I look at this one. What's my b value? 16. 16 divided by 2 is 8. 64. So I would have to add 64 to both sides of my equation. Keep it balanced. Say that again? Yeah. So it would be x minus 8 squared. Yeah, because the number before I squared it was 8, and the sign right there was a minus sign. Okay, how about this one? What's your b value? I saw the look on your face. Why is she making that face? I can't divide that. It's all right. I don't need a calculator, right? No, I'm just going to leave it. And then when I square it, how do you square a fraction? What's 7 squared? What's 2 squared? So 49 over 4 is what you would add to both sides. Okay, so when you're squaring a fraction, you just square the top and square the bottom. Same way when you're taking the square root of them, you do the top and you do the bottom. So how would this factor? It would be x, what's my sign? Plus, and this is when you're really happy you kept your little side note, it's 7 over 2. Yeah, so when they're ugly fractions, absolutely. A lot of these have some pretty fractions in them. That's why this little side note that you make over here is very helpful. And that's why I still to this day, I will do that. All right, number 5. What's your b value? 13. We divide it by 2, which doesn't divide nicely. Good. 169 over 4 is what you're going to have there. Then how does it factor? Perfect. Squared. Because, yeah, technically it would factor to 2 of those. All right, but this whole process is called completing the square because I'm guaranteed I will be able to write it something squared. How are we doing so far? Pretty good? Okay. So that's just us practicing that part of it. Now let's practice the whole process. Okay? So look at your pink sheet. This is especially when people love the pink sheet for your step-by-steps here. So the first thing you want to do is what? I need to move that c, right? So I'm going to have to add 21 to both sides. So we get x squared minus 20x equals 21. Now, notice how I wrote that. Do you guys see how I left a little gap in there? Why did I leave a gap? I'm going to have to add something to both sides of my equation. So I left the gap so I could write that. Okay? Right, because your next step is to divide by a, but your a value, it's just a 1. I don't have to worry about it. Tomorrow, again, we'll focus on that, but I don't want you to forget that that is your next step. All right? And then what's your b value? 20 divided by 2 is 10, and 10 squared is 100. So that is what I'm adding to both sides of my equation. Now, some people will be like, why do I have to even write that down if I'm just going to factor it in the very next step? Well, because this is what I'm factoring. If I don't put the 100 down, what are you factoring? All right, plus, if I have this on this side, I have to put it over here, so it's going to change that side of your equation. All right, so the next step is to factor this. It will factor to something squared. That's the point of this. How does it factor? Not really sure where 11 came from. It would be x minus 10 squared. Oh, I see where he was going. He's a step ahead. What's 21 plus 100? 121. Yeah, he's doing the very next step. All right, now it looks just like what we just practiced. This is now your square root method, right? We take the square root of both sides to undo that square. So we get x minus 10 equals, Ramon? Just 11? Thank you, Tatiana. Plus or minus 11. Can't forget that plus or minus there, guys. And then your last step to solve for x. We're going to add that 10. So 10 plus or minus 11. Stop there or keep going? Keep going. Those are like terms. 10 plus 11? 10 minus 11? Negative 1. So your two answers are 21 and negative 1. All right, that was your first completing the square. We all right? It's a lot of steps. That's why we have them written down. The more we do them, the more they start to make sense, okay? Let's take a look at number 7. Okay, go back to your pink sheet. Let's look at your steps. What's the first thing we do? We're going to move the c value. So we have to subtract 4. I always add my b over 2 squared to both sides. But on that first step, I just move in my c, so I have to follow whatever the math rules are. Yep, no, good questions. All right, so I'm going to move my c. Step 2 is to divide by a. But I don't have to worry about that. I don't have an a value today. All right, and then your next step is b over 2 squared. What's your b value? 12 divided by 2. And 6 squared, 36. So I'm adding 36 to both sides. Now, you're going to hear me ask you guys a lot, why did I just do that? There's 2 reasons. Why did I do that? Ramon? Answer my question. Why did I do that? Why did I add 36 to both sides? I need you to know why we're doing it. Good? Okay, if I add it on one, I have to add the other. That's one reason. Why am I doing it in the first place? What's the whole point? What am I trying to do, Kelsey? I'm trying to get it so it factors perfect, right? Into something squared. Yeah, the whole point of this is to make it factor perfect. That's the whole point. That's why we're doing it. Okay? All right, so the next question is, how does it factor? Good. It'd be x minus 6 squared. And again, it's always the minus sign, and it's always that number before you squared it. So that should be an easy step. Everything's sitting right there for you. Equals 32. All right, your next step is to take the square root. This is just what we learned yesterday. I'm going to have to do a factor tree here. So 16 and yeah, you're going to end up with 4 radical 2. And don't forget plus or minus. Good. And then add your 6 over here. So 6 plus or minus 4 radical 2. Doesn't matter. Do I end up at the same place? That's why I chose not to. All right, we're 2 problems in. Are we feeling a little better? No? Can I ask where you're lost? For which part, hon? From the 12. Uh-huh. The 36 came from the b value, which is 12. We divide it by 2, and then we have to square it. Yeah, if you look on your pink sheet, we wrote that part down, b over 2 squared. It's that part every single time. That's why I typically would do it in a separate color so you can really see where that came from. Yeah, absolutely write those down. Yeah, if you make those little notes, you have half your work done right there. All right, guys, take a look at number 8. What's the first thing we want to do? Subtract 8. Move the c value. You want that thing gone. So x squared minus 10x equals negative 8. Sounds like a helicopter. I don't feel it. No, it sounds like a helicopter. All right, guys, your next step is to divide by a. Do I have an a value? No, not an a value. All right, so next is here's the new part, guys, the b over 2 squared. So what's your b value? 10. You divide it by 2, which is, and then we square it, which is 25. So I'm going to add 25 to both sides. Ramon, slow down, bud. We got some people who don't understand, okay, so we need to go slow. All right, so that right here in red, guys, I always typically try to do that in separate colors so it stands out. That's that new part. And please, please, please make these little side notes. There's no shame in that, guys. I still do this. Right? I think I'm fairly decent at math, and I still will do this off to the side. Okay? All right, again, the whole point of this is so that we can get it to factor perfectly. So how does it factor? Good. It's going to be x minus 5 squared. There's your minus. There's your 5. Again, if you write it down, it's sitting right there ready for you to go. And then negative 8 plus 25. Okay. Next up, take square root. Good. Radical 17 does not have a factor tree. It's prime. And then to get x by itself, we're going to add the 5. So 5 plus or minus radical 17. Keep going or stop? We stop there. Those are not like terms. Doing okay? Okay. Number 9. Do you want to try it on your own? Oh, wait, this one comes out with a fraction. Let's not do that on your own yet. Sorry, this is an ugly fraction. I don't want to leave you hanging on an ugly one. All right, so number 9, what's the first thing we do? Let's subtract your c. Move that over there. So x squared plus 9x equals negative 12. Divide by a. I don't have to worry about that this time. All right, what's your b value? 9. Divided by 2. It doesn't divide nicely, so just leave it. And then we square. Good. So that'd be 81 over 4. Thank you. So 81 over 4, we add that to both sides. Oops, I just wrote the wrong number. 81 over 4. All right, those of you who are not so great at fractions, your calculator becomes your best friend, okay? So let's factor this first. We should be able to do that no problems. How does this factor? Good. It's always a plus right because of that. It's a 9 over 2 because of that right there. And then those of you who are not so great at math and fractions, grab your calculator. What's negative 12 plus 81 fourths? Oh, I don't want a mixed number. You can hit second ABC and it'll switch it for you. I don't want a mixed number. There you go. All right, guys, if you're using your calculator, that gave you 8 1/4. Right? To do it in your head, you would multiply 4 times 8, right? You multiply and then you add the top. That's how you do it. Yeah, multiply then add. Otherwise, guys, your calculator, if you have this, just hit the second button and then that ABC fraction button that you have and hit equals. It'll switch it for you. If you're using my graphing calculators, we'll talk about that later because it's not as user-friendly. Yeah, it's under the math menu. Okay. So questions to here. Again, fractions, that's fine, but make sure they're improper. Do not give me mixed numbers because of your next step. What happens at your next step? Take square root. If I did not have a mixed, or if I had a mixed number, how would you square root 8 1/4? You wouldn't know how to do it. Okay, that's why if it's improper, we can do the top, we can do the bottom. Okay, so over here we got x plus 9 over 2. All right, let's take care of that fraction. Can I do anything with the radical 33? Yeah, so that's just going to say radical 33. Square root of 4? 2. Don't forget your plus minus. And your last step? Good. So negative 9 over 2 plus or minus radical 33 over 2. Is it pretty? Nope, sure isn't. All right, but can we deal with it? Yeah, we can do that. All right, so fractions, you want them improper. Do not write down mixed numbers, okay? All right, questions before we move on? I think we got one more today. Mm-hmm. In the calculator or by hand? So do you have it up right now, 8 1/4? Yeah, get 8 1/4 in there. Okay, hit the second button, and then hit your fraction button, that ABC, and then hit equals. Yeah, you have to get it where it says 8 1/4 on there first. So hit equals. Okay, now hit second. No, you squared it. You didn't hit the second button. Hit equals. There you go. Second, and then hit the fraction button. Hit equals. There you go. You're welcome. All right, take a look at number 10. Oh, there's fractions to start with. How does that feel? Great? Disgusting? All right. Don't go on strike. All right, guys, it's all right. Let's just deal with it, right? What's your first step? Let's move your c value over. So you're going to have x squared minus x. Negative 15 over 4 becomes positive 15 over 4. Okay, so I move my c value. It's the first thing we do. What's your next step? Well, technically, what's your next step? Divide by a. It's our focus tomorrow. I don't want you to forget about it, which I don't have an a to worry about. Then what's your next step? Your b. What's your b value? There's a 1 there, guys. So I want the number, not the x value. Okay, so it's 1 divided by 2. It's just 1/2. And then we square it. What's 1/2 squared? What's 1 times 1? 1. It's all right. So it's 1/4. Even if you distribute the 2, it's an exponent, so 1 squared is still 1. You'd be in math jail for something like that. I keep saying every year I'm going to make a little math jail in the corner of my room, and if you do something wrong with that, you're going to make you go stand in. Right? Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. All right, so my b value is 1. There is a 1 sitting there. So we divide by 2, which is just half. Square it. 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. Add that to both sides, and we do that, so now we guaranteed it will factor perfectly. How does it factor? Good. All right, there's your minus sign. If you make your little side note, it's sitting right there. Right, and then what's 15/4 plus 1/4? 16/4, which is 4. And again, could you use a calculator? Yes, you could. You could. All right, what's your next step? Square root. So we get x minus half equals plus or minus 2. Thank you. Makes a big difference. And then we have to move the half over. All right, so these are like terms, right? What's 1/2 plus 2? 2 1/2. Is it okay to have a mixed number as my final answer? That's simplified. It's okay, because are you going to be taking the square root of it or doing anything with it? No, you can leave it 2 1/2. That's okay. And then what's 1/2 minus 2? It'd be negative 1 1/2. Some of you, your calculator is your best friend. All right. How we feeling? We got our step by step. Can we follow step by step? Okay. I think we'll stop there. We'll save more of those examples and move it into the next part of it for tomorrow.